Welcome to a new episode of Inside the Economist's Mind. Today we're taking a deep dive into a really fundamental tool, something the Australian government uses a lot when it's thinking about new policies. Cost-benefit analysis. CBA for short.
hmm
Think of it as, well, the government's way of systematically weighing up the good and the bad of different options, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Mm.
We're going to unpack what CVA actually involves, look at why it's such a key part of the whole decision-making process here in Australia, and show how it gives you a kind of structured framework for tackling these often really complex policy choices.
And to really, get under the hood, we're drawing on the Australian government's own guidance on cost-benefit analysis. The latest version's from July 2023.
That's right. And it's a really useful document. It gives great insight into the principles and the sort of nuts and bolts of how the government evaluates potential policies.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to get a solid grasp of the core ideas behind CBA.
Hmm.
What are its strengths? What are the challenges in actually doing it?
Yeah, basically giving you a shortcut to being, well, properly informed about how these big government decisions get made.
Okay, let's start unpacking. What is cost-benefit analysis in, simple terms? It sounds pretty straightforward, pros and cons, but I suspect there's a bit more to it.
You're right, there is. I mean, at its heart, CBA is a systematic way of looking at all the impacts, good and bad, that a proposed policy might have.
All of them?
Well, ideally, yes,
Yeah.
on the community, the economy, the whole picture. And what's really important is that it tries to look beyond just the, say, immediate financial stuff.
Uh-huh.
It tries to consider the wider consequences, the knock-on effects for everyone.
Right, so seeing the whole picture, not just the first thing you spot.
Precisely. And the goal, whenever possible, is to actually put a monetary value, a dollar figure, on these gains and losses.
Okay, why do that?
Well, it helps provide a more objective way to compare different options. But look, even if you can't put a precise dollar figure on everything, and often you can't, the CBA framework itself still makes the whole decision-making process much clearer. It forces you to think systematically.
And why bother trying to put dollar values on things? What's the real advantage?
The fundamental reason, really, is that CBA helps us understand how efficiently we're using our resources, society's resources.
Efficiency, okay.
Yeah. By adding up all the benefits in dollar terms and subtracting all the costs, again in dollar terms, for everyone affected, you can see if the proposal leads to a net positive outcome overall.
So if the total value of the gains is bigger than the total value of the losses.
But then it suggests the proposal would actually make things more efficient, better use of resources for society.
That makes sense. So, okay, why has CBA become such a standard tool then? Why does the Australian government find it so useful? What are the specific plus points?
Well, there are quite a few key reasons. First off, it gives decision makers a really comprehensive view of what a proposed regulation is likely to do. It brings together quantitative data, the numbers, and more qualitative information too.
So it's not just about crunching the numbers then.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, putting a monetary value on impacts is a big part, sure. But CBA also really pushes for this wider look at all the potential upsides and downsides.
Right.
And this helps avoid decisions that might, look good for one particular group, but actually cause big problems for the wider community.
That sounds like a good check against sort of narrow interests driving policy decisions.
Exactly. And another thing, CVA provides a consistent method for assessing different proposals, a standard approach.
Ah, so you can compare apples with apples, more or less.
Yeah, it promotes comparability.
Yeah.
It means the government can compare different options more easily, set priorities maybe more effectively, and ultimately make more consistent decisions across different departments or policy areas.
Consistency must be pretty important when you're dealing with public funds.
It really is. And another big plus is that CBA helps us see the connections, the linkages between different parts of the economy.
How so?
Well, think about, say, a policy to improve workplace safety. The direct effect is fewer accidents, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that could also lead to lower healthcare costs down the track. That's another economic benefit, and CBA helps you capture that.
Okay, seeing how it all sort of interconnected.
Exactly. And it also helps find the most cost-effective way to achieve a goal, because it forces you to look closely at all the costs involved.
Right.
And finally, even when it's really hard to get precise numbers, the whole process of doing a CBA makes the underlying assumptions and the judgments transparent. People can see how a decision was reached, what went into it.
Okay, so it's this thorough, consistent, transparent way to evaluate options. Now, that guidance document you mentioned, it lays out 9 steps for doing a CVA. 9 sounds like quite a lot. Can you give us a quick run through?
Sure, it does sound like a lot, but they provide a pretty logical structure. Step one is basically specifying the options. What are we actually considering? And crucially, this includes a do-nothing or base case option.
The what happens if we just carry on as we are scenario.
Exactly that. Step two is deciding whose costs and benefits actually count. Who are we including in this? For most federal policies in Australia, the focus is usually national, impacts on Australians.
Makes sense for national policy. What's next?
Step three involves identifying all the likely impacts for each option and figuring out how to measure them. Remember, we're looking for the incremental effects, the differences compared to that do-nothing base case.
Right, the additional costs and benefits.
Precisely. Step four is then predicting these impacts over the life of the proposed policy or regulation. The guidance suggests being cautious about going too far out, maybe 20 years max usually, because predicting the future gets very uncertain.
Yeah, crystal balls are always a bit unreliable.
Aren't they just? Step five is where we try to monetize those impacts, put dollar values on them.
Okay.
Then step six is really crucial. Discounting. This means adjusting future costs and benefits to get their equivalent value in today's terms.
Why do we need to do that? Isn't a dollar tomorrow worth a dollar today?
Well, no, not usually in economics because of the time value of money. Two main reasons, really. First, people generally prefer to get a benefit sooner rather than later. That's time preference.
Okay.
And second, money used for a policy today could have been invested elsewhere and earned a return. That's the opportunity cost. Discounting brings both those ideas into the calculation.
I see.
The Office of Impact Analysis actually suggests using a central rate of 7%, but also testing rates like 3% and 10% to see how sensitive the result is.
Right, checking the assumptions. So we're translating future money into today's value. What's step 7?
Step 7 is calculating the net present value, the NPV, for each option. Simple idea. Just the total present value of benefits minus the total present value of costs.
And if it's positive?
A positive NPV generally indicates the policy is expected to improve efficiency. Good use of resources.
The bottom line number in today's dollars.
Pretty much. Step 8 is sensitivity analysis. This is vital. It means testing how the resulted NPV changes if we vary some of our key assumptions or numbers,
Yes.
especially the uncertain ones.
Like a what-if analysis.
Exactly. What if costs are higher? What if benefits are lower? What if we use a different discount rate? It shows how robust the conclusion is. You might look at best-worst cases or change specific variables.
Makes sense. And the last step.
Step 9 is reaching a conclusion. Based on the NPV, the sensitivity analysis, and any other important factors, you recommend the best option, usually the one with the highest positive NPV, assuming it holds up under sensitivity testing.
9 steps. That's certainly comprehensive. Now, you mentioned earlier, and it seems obvious, it's not always easy putting a dollar value on everything. How does CBA handle things like, say, environmental damage or social impacts or improving people's well-being?
Yeah, this is a really critical aspect, and the guidance is clear on it. It acknowledges that many important impacts, environmental, social, cultural, are genuinely hard to monetize accurately.
Why is that?
Often because there's a lot of uncertainty, or there just isn't a market price for, say, clean air or community cohesion.
So do they just get left out of the calculation then? Ignored?
No, definitely not. Or at least they shouldn't be. The guidance stresses that all significant costs and benefits should still be identified, described, and if possible, quantified, even if not in dollar terms.
Quantify. You mean like counting things?
Exactly. Measure the impact in some physical or observable unit if you can. For instance, the expected reduction in tons of a pollutant, or the number of people likely to gain access to a new service.
So having a quantity, even without a price tag, is still valuable information for the decision maker.
Absolutely. And when putting a dollar value just isn't feasible or reliable, then qualitative analysis becomes really important. This means providing clear descriptions, evidence, case studies, anything that helps decision makers understand the nature and potential scale of these non-monetized impacts.
Okay, but what about trying to work out an indirect dollar value? I think I've heard about things like valuing a park based on how much people pay for houses nearby or something.
Yes. You're getting into what we call non-market valuation techniques. Broadly, there are two main approaches mentioned: revealed preference and stated preference.
Okay.
Revealed preference methods look at people's actual behavior in related markets to infer value. So, your house price example is one, how much more do people pay for a house near a park? Or, how much time and money do people spend traveling to a recreational site? That tells you something about its value to them.
Right, like detective work using market clues.
Kind of, yeah. Another example might be looking at what people spend on safety devices, like smoke alarms, to infer how much they value reducing risk.
So, following the trail of what people actually do and spend money on, what about the other one? Stated preference.
Stated preference techniques use surveys to directly ask people about their values. Common methods are contingent valuation, like asking, how much would you be willing to pay for X? And choice modeling, where people are given hypothetical scenarios with different attributes and asked to choose.
So you just ask them. That sounds simpler, maybe.
It can seem simpler, but comes with challenges. People might not have well-formed preferences, or they might give answers they think are socially desirable, or they might just not take a hypothetical question that seriously. It's what people say they do, not what they actually do.
So maybe less reliable than looking at actual behavior.
Generally, yes.
Mhm.
The guidance does note that revealed preference estimates, being based on actual choices, are often considered more credible if they're available and well conducted. Stated preference is useful, especially for non-use values like wanting to know an endangered species exists even if you never see it, but you have to be careful with the survey design and interpretation.
What about borrowing values? If someone else did a good study on, say, the cost of noise pollution, can you just use their number?
That's called benefit transfer. And yes, it can be a quicker, cheaper option than doing a whole new valuation study from scratch. You might take an estimate for, say, the value of travel time savings or the value of a statistical life from existing literature.
Value of a statistical life. We should probably talk about that one.
Yes, but just on benefit transfer first, the guidance is pretty strong on being cautious. You really need to justify why that borrowed value is appropriate for your specific context. Is the original study high quality? Are the populations similar? Are the contexts comparable? You have to scrutinize it carefully.
Right. Do your homework before just grabbing a number off the shelf.
Exactly. So yes, the value of a statistical life, or VSL, is a key concept in CBA, especially for policies related to health and safety.
It sounds a bit jarring, doesn't it? Putting a dollar value on life.
It does sound jarring, and it's really important to be clear what it is not. It's not the value of preventing the death of a specific, identifiable person.
Okay. So what is it then?
It's an estimate of how much society, collectively, is willing to pay for small reductions in the risk of premature death across a large population. It's derived, usually, from those revealed preference studies looking at how much extra people are willing to pay for, say, a slightly safer job or a car with better safety features. It's about valuing risk reduction, not individuals.
Okay, that distinction helps. It's about small changes in risk for lots of people, adding up. Now, CBA seems very focused on the total picture, on efficiency of the biggest net benefit overall. But what about fairness? Does it care who pays the costs and who gets the benefits?
That's a fundamental question, and the guidance is quite clear. Standard CBA aggregates everything up. It adds all the benefits together, adds all the costs together, and compares the totals.
Yeah.
It implicitly assumes a dollar is a dollar, regardless of whether that dollar goes to someone rich or someone poor.
So a policy could have a positive NPV overall, meaning total benefits outweigh total costs.
But those benefits might go mainly to one group, while the costs fall heavily on another, perhaps more disadvantaged group.
Yes. So CBA itself doesn't really tell you if a policy is fair.
No, its primary focus is efficiency, maximizing the size of the overall economic pie, so to speak. But, and this is crucial, the guidance emphasizes that distributional effects, equity, fairness, these are incredibly important considerations for decision makers.
So CBA provides the efficiency analysis, and then policymakers need to layer on the equity considerations separately.
That's generally how it works. While CBA doesn't solve the equity issue, it can provide valuable information for that equity assessment. A good CBA should try to identify, where possible, which groups in society are likely to gain and which are likely to lose from a policy, and maybe the scale of those impacts.
So it maps out who the winners and losers might be.
It can, yes, if the data allows. That information then helps policymakers weigh up the efficiency gains against any potential fairness concerns and decide if, perhaps, other measures are needed to compensate losers or address unfair outcomes.
Makes the trade-offs clearer, hopefully.
That's the aim. The guidance also briefly mentions the tricky issue of future generations. It suggests that rather than just fiddling with the discount rate to account for long-term impacts, It's better to explicitly consider the effects on future generations as a separate point.
Right. Tackle that head on rather than burying it in the discount rate maths.
Seems to be the recommendation.
Okay. So, before we wrap up, are there any common traps or mistakes people should be aware of when they see or hear about a CBA? Things that can go wrong.
Oh, definitely. The guidance highlights a few common pitfalls. One big one is downplaying or even ignoring significant social or environmental costs and benefits just because they're hard to monetize.
The if you can't count it, it doesn't count problem.
Exactly. It's vital that easily measured financial impacts don't automatically overshadow other really important factors, like community disruption from a big infrastructure project, for example. Those need to be properly described and considered, even without a perfect dollar figure.
Good point. What else?
Another classic mistake is double counting benefits. For example, claiming both the time saved by commuters and the increase in nearby property values from a new train line as separate benefits.
Because the higher property values probably already reflect the benefit of saved time.
Precisely. The property value increase is likely capturing or capitalizing the value of improved accessibility and time savings. You can't count both as if they're independent gains.
Got it. Any others?
Yeah, a really common one is using a simple before and after comparison instead of the proper with and without comparison.
What's the difference?
Well, before and after just looks at the situation before the policy and after. But lots of other things might have changed in the meantime. A proper CBA compares the world with the policy implemented against the world without the policy that do nothing, base case we talked about. That isolates the policy's true impact.
So getting that baseline right is critical.
Absolutely crucial. And one more technical one. Using the wrong discount rate, specifically using a risk-free rate to discount benefits and costs that are actually quite uncertain or risky. The discount rate should ideally reflect the riskiness of the flows you're discounting. Right? Important technical details to get right for a reliable result.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. It really sounds like cost-benefit analysis is, well, a pretty indispensable tool for governments, isn't it?
I'd say so, yeah.
It gives this structured and, where possible, monetized way to assess different policy options, carefully weighing up costs against benefits, looking at the whole community.
Encouraging that comprehensive view and transparency, too. Even when you're grappling with those difficult-to-value impacts or thinking about fairness, it's not perfect, no system is, but it provides a really valuable framework.
And hopefully, by understanding these core principles of CBA, you, listening, now have a better framework for thinking critically about policy debates. You can understand the kind of economic logic that might be underpinning government decisions you hear about.
Yeah, you can approach those discussions about new regulations or big projects with a clearer sense of the analysis that, well, hopefully went into them.
So here's a final thought for you to mull over. Think about a recent policy decision you've encountered, maybe something in the news or locally. How do you think a cost-benefit analysis might have influenced that decision?
And perhaps more interestingly, what non-monetized factors, social, environmental, ethical, do you think played a big role? How could those have been weighed up alongside the purely economic figures that a CBA focuses on?
It really highlights that complexity, doesn't it? How CBA is just one important piece, but not the whole puzzle in real-world decision-making.